the only human species left alive, that sentence should feel stranger than it does. For most of our existence on this planet, we were not alone. There were others. Not other animals that looked vaguely human. Other humans. Different species of the same genus, walking the same landscapes, using tools, controlling fire, burying their dead, and in some cases looking us in the eye across a shared territory. They are all gone now. Every single one. And the question of what they were, how they lived, and why they disappeared while we survived is one of the most important and most disturbing questions in the entire history of life on Earth. These are the major human species that existed before us, and after us, there were none. Number 10. Homo habilis, roughly 2.4 to 1.4 million years ago, Eastern and Southern Africa. This is where tools enter the story. Homo habilis, the handyman, is the earliest species most paleoanthropologists associate with deliberate stone tool production. The tools themselves are crude by later standards, sharp-edged flakes struck from river cobbles known as Oldowan tools, but crude is relative. No other species on the planet was doing this. The brain was larger than any Australopithecine before it, roughly 600 to 700 cubic centimetres, but still less than half the size of a modern human brain. The body was small, probably around 4 feet tall. The face was still heavily built, with large brow ridges and a projecting jaw. Habilis is controversial. Some researchers argue it should not be classified as Homo at all, that it sits too close to the Australopithecine line to deserve the label human. Others argue the tools are the dividing line. Once you start shaping stone deliberately, something has changed in the mind that justifies the distinction. What is not controversial is the timeline. Habilis appears in the fossil record approximately 2.4 million years ago. For the next million years, these small-brained, tool-using primates occupied a world that would have been unrecognizable to us. Open savanna. Dense predator populations. No fire, no shelter beyond what geography provided. They survived by being smart enough to cut meat from carcasses faster than the competition could take it from them. Speed of processing, not speed of body. That is what the tools were for. Number 9. Homo erectus. Roughly 1.9 million to 110,000 years ago. Africa, Asia, Europe. If habilis is where the human story begins, erectus is where it becomes serious. Homo erectus was the first human species to leave Africa, the first to control fire consistently, the first to develop a body plan that looks recognizably modern in its proportions. Tall, relatively slender, with long legs built for sustained walking and running across open terrain. Brain size increased significantly, reaching 900 to 1100 cubic centimetres in later populations. The tools changed too. Erectus is associated with the Acheulean hand axe, a teardrop-shaped stone tool that required considerably more cognitive planning to produce than the simple flakes of Oldowan technology. Making an Acheulean axe means holding a target shape in the mind and removing material systematically to reach it. That is mental representation. That is thinking about thinking. Erectus fossils have been found in Kenya, Georgia, Indonesia, China, and possibly southern Europe. The species persisted for nearly 2 million years, making it by far the most successful human species in terms of sheer duration. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Erectus lasted almost 7 times longer. That fact alone should make you cautious about assuming we are evolution's final answer. Number 8. Homo heidelbergensis, roughly 700 to 200,000 years ago. Africa and Europe. Heidelbergensis is the bridge. The species most researchers place between Erectus and both Neanderthals and modern humans. It is where the evolutionary road forks. The brain was large, approaching modern human volume in some specimens, around 1200 cubic centimetres. The body was powerfully built, broader and more muscular than modern humans, adapted to the cooling climates of Pleistocene Europe. At Boxgrove in England, researchers found butchered horse bones alongside hand axes dated to roughly 500,000 years ago. The cut marks on the bones show systematic, skilled processing. Somebody was hunting large game cooperatively and processing it with tools that required planning to manufacture. At Atapuerca in Spain, the Cima de los Huesos pit contains the remains of at least 28 individuals dated to around 400,000 years ago. The bones were deliberately placed there. Whether this represents burial, disposal, or something else remains debated, but the deliberate placement of bodies in a specific location is behaviour that carries meaning beyond simple abandonment. Heidelbergensis was probably the last common ancestor of Neanderthals and us. Two lineages diverged from this population. One went north into Ice Age Europe and became the Neanderthals. The other stayed in Africa and became us. Same starting point, completely different endings. Number 7. Homo neanderthalensis. Roughly 400 to 40,000 years ago. Europe and Western Asia. Neanderthals are the species everyone thinks they know and almost nobody knows correctly. They were not stupid. Their brains were as large as ours, in some cases larger, averaging around 1,400 to some 1,400 cubic centimetres. They were not clumsy. Their bodies were built for close-range ambush hunting of large, dangerous prey in cold environments. They were stockier than modern humans, with barrel chests, thick limb bones, and powerful muscles. Their arms showed asymmetric development consistent with repeated thrusting with heavy spears. They hunted at distances where the animal could hit back. They made sophisticated Mousterian stone tools. They controlled fire. They made adhesives from birch bark, which requires maintaining specific temperatures for extended periods. They wore eagle talons as jewellery at Krapina in Croatia 130,000 years ago. They built stone ring structures deep inside Brunicle Cave in France 176,000 years ago, far beyond the reach of daylight, requiring controlled fire and cooperative planning. They buried their dead. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, one male had survived for years with injuries so severe he could not have fed or protected himself. His community kept him alive. They interbred with us. Modern humans of non-African descent carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. Their genes affect our immune systems, our skin, and our response to certain diseases. They were human in every way that matters. And they disappeared approximately 40,000 years ago, within a few thousand years of our sustained arrival in their territory. If you find this kind of deep human history genuinely compelling, I make content like this regularly, and I would genuinely appreciate it if you subscribed. Number 6. Homo denisova. Roughly 300 to 50,000 years ago. Central and Eastern Asia. The Denisovans are the ghost species. We know they existed almost entirely from DNA rather than bones. In 2010, a fingerbone fragment and 2 teeth found in Denisova Cave in Siberia yielded enough genetic material to sequence an entire genome. The DNA showed a population distinct from both Neanderthals and modern humans, though more closely related to Neanderthals. Since then, Denisovan DNA has been found in modern human populations across Southeast Asia, Melanesia and Australia. Tibetan populations carry a Denisovan gene variant called EPAS1 that helps them survive at extreme altitude. The Denisovans gave modern Tibetans the ability to breathe thin air. A jawbone found in Siahe, Tibet, at an altitude of over 10,000 feet, has been identified as Denisovan. These were not cave dwellers hiding from the cold. They were living at altitudes that challenge modern mountaineers. We have almost no fossils. We have almost no tools we can confidently assign to them, but their DNA is inside billions of living people. They are the species we know least about and carry most of. Number 5. Homo floresiensis. Roughly 100 to 50,000 years ago. The island of Flores, Indonesia. When the remains were announced in 2004, the scientific world briefly lost its composure. The skeleton was adult. Female. Approximately 3.5 feet tall, brain volume roughly 420 cubic centimetres, smaller than a chimpanzee's. And she had been making stone tools. Homo floresiensis, immediately nicknamed the Hobbit, violated every assumption about the relationship between brain size and cognitive ability. A brain that's small should not have been capable of the tool manufacture found at the site. But the tools were there, and the animal bones showing systematic butchery were there, and the evidence of fire use was there. The most likely explanation is island dwarfism. A population of larger-bodied humans, possibly descended from Erectus, arrived on Flores and over tens of thousands of years shrank in response to limited resources. The brain shrank with the body, but the cognitive architecture apparently remained functional enough to support tool use, hunting, and fire management. Floresiensis shared the island with Komodo dragons and a species of dwarf elephant called stegodon. They hunted the stegodon. They coexisted with the dragons. They disappeared around 50,000 years ago. Whether modern humans played a role in their extinction remains unknown. Number 4. Homo naledi, roughly 335 to 236,000 years ago. South Africa. Naledi is the species that does not fit. The fossils were found deep inside the Rising Star Cave system near Johannesburg, in a chamber accessible only through a narrow chute less than 8 inches wide. Over 1,500 bone fragments representing at least 15 individuals were recovered. The bones show a mosaic of primitive and modern features. The hands could grip tools, the feet could walk upright, the shoulders were built for climbing, the brain was small, roughly 500 cubic centimeters, and the bodies appear to have been deliberately placed in the chamber. This is the part that caused controversy. Deliberate body disposal implies symbolic behavior. It implies that the living cared about what happened to the dead. It implies meaning. And meaning, in a brain that small, was not supposed to exist. Lee Berger of the University of the Witwatersrand led the excavation and argued publicly that Naledi was engaging in mortuary behavior, possibly even ritual. Critics pushed back hard, arguing that the bodies could have been washed into the chamber by water or deposited by predators. But no predator marks were found on the bones. No water-deposited sediment patterns were found, and the chamber is so difficult to access that reaching it requires deliberate, sustained effort even for modern cavers. Naledi may have been burying its dead with a brain 1/3 the size of ours. That should permanently complicate how you think about intelligence. Number 3. Homo longi, possibly 300 to 146,000 years ago. Northern China. In 2021, researchers described a remarkably complete skull that had been hidden for decades. The skull had been found in 1933 by a Chinese labourer working on a bridge project in Harbin during the Japanese occupation. He hid the skull in a well rather than turning it over to the Japanese authorities. It remained hidden for nearly 90 years. The skull is massive. The brain case is approximately 1,420 cubic centimetres, within the range of modern humans. But the face is different. Wide, heavy brow ridges, a broad nose, square eye sockets. It does not look like us, and it does not look like a Neanderthal. The team that described it proposed it as a new species, Homo longi the dragon man, and argued it may be more closely related to modern humans than Neanderthals are. Not everyone agrees. Some researchers believe the Harbin skull belongs to the Denisovans. If true, it would finally give us a face for the ghost species. Either way, the skull proves that human diversity during the Middle Pleistocene was far greater than the simple story of us versus Neanderthals suggests. There were more of us than we knew. And by us I mean more kinds of humans sharing the planet at the same time. Number 2. Homo antecessor. Roughly 1.2 million to 800,000 years ago. Spain. At the Grandolina site at Atapuerca, researchers found fragments of at least 6 individuals dating to around 800,000 years ago. The facial bones show a surprisingly modern configuration, a flat, vertical face rather than the projecting, heavy face typical of other archaic species. Some researchers have proposed antecessor as the last common ancestor of both Neanderthals and modern humans, pushing the divergence point much further back than Heidelbergensis. But here is the detail that makes antecessor genuinely disturbing. The bones, show cut marks. Systematic cut marks, made by stone tools. On human bone, the same kind of marks found on the animal bones processed for food at the same site. The evidence strongly suggests that antecessor practiced cannibalism. Not ritual, not symbolic consumption of the dead. The bones were treated the same way deer and horse bones were treated at the same site. The meat was removed from the bone. The marrow was extracted. Some of the individuals were children. 800,000 years ago, in what is now Spain, one group of humans was eating another group of humans using the same tools and the same techniques they used on animals. Whether this was warfare, resource stress, or something else remains debated. What is not debated is the evidence. The cut marks are there. Number 1. Us. Homo sapiens. Roughly 300,000 years ago to present. Originally Africa. Now everywhere. We are the last ones standing. Not because we were the strongest. Neanderthals were stronger. Not because we were the most durable. Erectus lasted nearly 2 million years. Not because we had the biggest brains. Neanderthals matched or exceeded us. Not because we were the first to use tools, control fire, bury the dead, or make art. Others did all of those things. We survived because of something harder to measure. Network size. Cultural transmission speed. The ability to pass complex information across generations without losing it. The capacity to build social groups large enough and flexible enough to absorb shocks that smaller, more rigid populations could not survive. Every other human species on this list eventually encountered conditions, climate, competition, disease, habitat loss, or contact with us that their population structure could not absorb. We absorbed it. Barely. Sometimes, at Toba, 74,000 years ago, we may have been reduced to a few thousand individuals. We came back. But here is the part that should stay with you. We are the only surviving human species on a planet that once held many. The Neanderthals are gone. The Denisovans are gone. Floresiensis, Naledi, Erectus, Heidelbergensis, Habilis, Antecessor, Longi, all gone. We outlasted every branch of our own family tree. That is not just a biological fact. That is a form of loneliness so deep it took us 300,000 years to notice it.